prayer and pledge, please, Dean.
Thank you, President Tom. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, help me and all people understand our strengths, so we may deploy them to assist others. Heavenly Father, help me and all people understand our weaknesses, so we may seek to improve ourselves. Heavenly Father, help me and all people maintain focus on self-improvement, maintain focus on service to others, and be relentless in pursuit of the greater good. We humbly beg, in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Dean. Lisa Marie Winslow, may we have a family of Rotary time right now? Yay.
Thank you, President Tom. So I am happy to share with you the birthdays, anniversaries of our membership. We don't have any member birthdays this week, surprisingly enough, but we do have spouse birthdays. Rick Morales' wife, Amy, is celebrating a birthday on March 10th. Harlan's wife, Patty, is celebrating a birthday tomorrow on St. Patty's Day. How ironic for that, right?
Yeah.
Patty's celebrating St. Patty's Day and a birthday. Woo. Yeah, right. Member anniversaries. B, past President B is celebrating 10 years with Rotary. Ken Flopman is celebrating 3 years with Rotary. And then we have several wedding anniversaries this coming week. Steve Madden on the 13th is celebrating 28 years. Tom Rainey is celebrating 32 years. George Morales is celebrating 51 years.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And Mike Dara is celebrating 40 years.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, you guys are gonna have to give me tips because I don't know. But happy birthday and anniversary to all. Putting on my other hat, I'm putting on my social hat now.
Unless you want to go like sit down and come back up again. So, so why don't you tell us a little bit about,
Thank you, President Tom. I'm so excited about that opportunity to share and put my social hat on. We are trying really hard to think of some social outdoor events that hopefully membership might be interested in. So there's 2 events that the social committee has put on the docket that we'd really like to get some feedback on. One is called Bubbles and Pearls. It's being hosted at Rue St. Mark, and it is a champagne and oysters happy hour outside. And obviously limited seating and all of that. And they're very, if you haven't been there, they're very COVID aware. And so that's the first event. And then it's a Monday evening. We're looking at the 29th of March for that, if that's something that the membership would like to participate in. And the second outdoor social event that we are looking at is doing something to help beautify and clean up Treaty Oaks Park, and then socialize after we do a little bit of work by bringing our own chairs and probably our own food and just some fellowship there in the outdoor environment of that beautiful park. So President Tom, I know you have actually attended the Bubbles and Pearls event. You want to share with the membership?
I've actually done that.
Can you move where they can hear you?
Yeah, so Bubbles and Pearls, it's fun. I mean, because we're not only going to do it if it's fun, but I mean, it's right around the corner. It's outdoors. They, Rue offers oysters any way you want them, and they have champagne, and of course, you can have anything else that they have going on. And we can take all that into account so that everybody's happy. But just like a show of hands, anybody interested in something like that?
What night would that be?
It'd be a Monday evening.
A Monday.
Happy hour-ish, like 5 to 7:30.
Expect that big, Bubbles and Beers, he said it's right up the corner.
It's right up at Rue St. Mark here.
It's on the point in San Marco.
Yeah, across from Matthews.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they have an outdoor area that we can spill over into. And once we know who might be interested, that's a nice show.
Yes.
Right. And so then I expect everyone to raise their hand for cleanup at Treaty Oak Park, right? Yeah, right? So yeah, so I think you got a yes on both counts.
Okay,
Good
thank you.
job.
We will move forward. Mark your calendars now for the 29th for Bubbles and Pearls, and we will move forward with a date for our Treaty Oak Park event.
Great, thanks,
Thank
Lisa
you.
Marie.
My pleasure.
Way to sell it. Good job. Crystal, Braun, would you come up and give everybody a little friendly reminder about our foundation, Rotary Foundation? Yeah.
I was first asked to welcome everybody and to welcome all our guests too. So can I do that first?
You may.
All right. So Robert Harris, I think you have half your law firm here today.
I wasn't folks that either worked for, worked against, or were prosecuted by Melissa. So. Tim Miller, Alan Roaster, Chris Wilson.
I'll do it. And then
Not Judge Wilson. In the middle.
Thank you, Robert. And then Carlos, you brought your guest again this week.
Yes, I did.
Please stand up and welcome him. Hello.
My name is Mo. I was the former president for the African Student Union. I do international business.
Great, welcome. Are we singing the song or are we bypassing
well,
that?
I'll try to.
We have to perform for Melissa.
Wow. Slave driver.
Did we miss any visitors on Zoom or in the audience here?
You know that means you have to sing, bro.
I can do that.
We here at Rotary welcome you today. So you came along, glad you came our way. And the love is yours, sunshine and rain. We here at Rotary say welcome, come again.
Okay, I've also been asked to give a few minutes in regards to a Paul Harris Foundation, Paul Harris Fellows. I'm the chair of the foundation committee, and we're trying to encourage more members to become Paul Harris Fellows. And that means you give money to the Paul Harris Foundation, and we have 59 Paul Harris Fellows in our midst. And the way some get there is you give $25 a quarter as part of your dues, or you can just write a check for $1,000 once a year. So once you've given $1,000 to the foundation, you become a Paul Harris Fellow. And so you can either do that over time, or you can do that each year with a check. Now, if you want to know what does the Paul Harris Foundation money go towards, there are 7 areas of focus. So you can pick the area that you want to focus on. I joined Rotary because of their emphasis on polio and water sanitation issues. So disease prevention and treatment is what 41% of the money goes towards, and that includes Polio Plus. There's also the water and sanitation issues, helping third world countries and their villages have sanitized water. 21% of the money goes towards that. And then there's also basic education and literacy, economic and community development, maternal and child health, peace and conflict prevention resolution, as well as starting in July of this year, they're now going to add a 7th area in regards to the environment. So if you have a calling or you really like one of those areas, you can designate your funds to go towards those types of works that are done by Rotary. Another way to become a Paul Harris Fellow is that if you give some money, you know, if you're given $25 a quarter, it takes a while to get to $1,000, but you get points for each dollar that you give. And so people like Mike, oh, where did he go? Mike and Barry and me and others, we have a lot of points accumulated, and we can donate them to you. If you're up to the point where you've donated $500, I can donate 500 of my points to you to help you become a Paul Harris Fellow. So if anybody is interested in doing that, the club overall has 8,600 points available to people who want to help get across the finish line. And then there are members with excess of 20,000 points each that are willing to donate their points to help you get across the finish line. So I would encourage everybody to please get to the become a Paul Harris Fellow, and pick out what area that you want to focus on. Yes.
You know, been in Rotary a long time, and I'm Paul Harris points. But can I? So if I continue, I don't need them anymore. Can I donate them?
Yes.
Okay.
Just
how do I do that?
You come talk to me.
Okay.
Or Patty. All right. Thank you.
And quick question. You know how the Rotary Foundation is rated and ranked? Like,
really high.
like, would it be within the top 1% of all charities in the United States?
It does.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They are very good at handling their money and have very little administrative costs.
Right.
So, and Patty has a handout with my committee. I think it was last October. I think it ended up being via Zoom, but we do have a handout that Patty can give to you that explains all the different levels of giving. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Russell.
Great.
Okay. So speaking of committees, moving forward, rather than letting committees sort of die on the vine until the new president comes in, we are going to support President-elect Richard that much more by perpetuating committees that are already moving along, like oratory. So oratory is now going to become a 12-month out of the year committee, rather than, oh my gosh, how are we going to jumpstart this again, so that it can continue to improve. I'm amazed every day that just because I said we were going to do oratory, it was as successful as it was this year. So, and that has nothing to do with me. I just said it. So I think that for us to have been successful this year as we have been, it's amazing for me to think what it can be next year and in continuing years. And so I think that most of our Avenue committees, we will run that the same way. It doesn't mean that if you agree to serve on a committee that you're on there for life. It just means that you will be mentoring. You can stay as long as you want, but you'll help to solicit and gather people who want to be on those committees with you. And if you receive a call that you hadn't expected, trying to get you to get on the membership committee with Bill Langley, that's why. And you can talk to me about that because it was my idea. But I want you to say yes because it is Rotary. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on where we were going with that. And wow, we just netted all this out. So we can introduce our speaker. Aaron, come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great privilege to introduce my friend and former boss, Melissa Nelson, very inspired and inspiring person in our community. We're very fortunate to have her here today. In 2016, the citizens of Clay, Duval, and Nassau counties overwhelmingly elected Melissa Nelson as the state attorney for Florida's 4th Judicial Circuit. She pledged to bring her tough but fair approach to the office while working to restore the public's faith in the justice system. Driven by the goal of deterring those that drive crime in Northeast Florida, she established the Targeted Prosecution Division and tasked it with aggressively prosecuting the most dangerous drivers of violence. Nelson also championed building the Crime Gun Intelligence Center, which leverages technology and interagency collaboration to improve collection, management, and analysis of gun crime evidence here in Jacksonville. It has been called a game changer for law enforcement. I think we're about to hear about some of that this afternoon. She also led an effort to reinvent the way law enforcement and prosecutors use ballistics technology as an investigative lead generator. These efforts aim to make our communities safer. She is committed to the pursuit of justice for all. She established Florida's first legislatively funded conviction integrity review unit and has demonstrated a commitment to pursuing intervention strategies focused on preventing youthful offenders from falling into a life of crime. To do this, she formed the Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee to identify and implement the results-driven strategies to reduce juvenile recidivism. She has spent, prior to being the state attorney, she was a prosecutor for 12 years here in Jacksonville and spent some time in private practice as well in McGuire Woods. Is that correct? Recently, Nelson was appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis to the statewide task force on opioid drug abuse. She serves on the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, Tobacco, and Explosives National Gun Crime Intelligence Governing Board. That is a mouthful. And she is a native Floridian, went to the University of Florida, go Gators, and she is raising her 3 children with her husband, Jason, here in Jacksonville. Let's welcome her.
Thanks for having me here today. It's nice to be among so many friends and colleagues. Dr. Webb, I got to speak to lots of people before, but I wanted to say hello to you. I saw you in the back. This is the first occasion I've had to be in person at a speaking engagement in a year, with the exception of one that I did in July in Clay County. I've done some things on Zoom, so it's nice to be back behind a podium sharing with you the things that our office is doing, specifically, as Aaron mentioned, about violent crime. David, where are you? Okay, you're in the back. Okay, great. So we put together just a PowerPoint that hopefully is not too wordy or distracting. It's really a prompt for me, but it does have a couple of videos and audio segments that I'd like to share with you. As Aaron mentioned, I, after law school, came to this office and stayed for 12 years as a prosecutor. I left in 2009, and before I left, I had the fortune to work in every corner of the office, and so I had handled violent crime, homicides, and gang violence. But when I left at a time that things looked very different than they did when I returned, and by that I mean the mechanism by which our young offenders, our trigger pullers, were using social media and platforms to both convey their threats and then celebrate their violence. I was really, when I returned to the office, shocked by this. I spent a whole summer with earphones in my ears to just perusing YouTube and finding publicly available videos that were produced, created by local young men and put on social media where they displayed unbelievable weapons, drum magazines, extended magazines. They talked about other gang members they intended to kill. They put lyrics and music to, as I said, celebrating those murders. And I was pretty stunned. And so I really, this started for me what has been a priority of our administration. It has been looking at violence and thinking about how we can attack it. So at the state attorney's office, as prosecutors, many of the lawyers and the judges in this office understand what we do, but we're charged with enforcing the law. So the police generally investigate and make an arrest, and then we're charged with completing perhaps that investigation, instituting formal charges, and seeing that case through to conviction. And so generally, historically, I've often said that is at the state attorney's office after the bad thing has already happened, right? We open our file after somebody's been shot, after somebody's been robbed. But so we're limited. We're not the police, and our presence on, a street corner is not going, in our suits, is not going to deter somebody from pulling out a gun and shooting somebody else, like a marked patrol car might. That said, I really started thinking about, hey, we have tools at our disposal in the state attorney's office, and what are enhance public safety. And before I start to talk about the problem that is today and then show you some examples, I do want to preface this talk with, we're the enforcement leg of the stool. And not only do we generally get engaged after the bad thing happens, we generally engage once it's very late for an offender. So lots of red flags have occurred before a 16-year-old decides to pull out a gun and kill someone. In my experience, that's not their first entree into a life of crime. And so I'm very, very intrigued by the two other legs of the stool that I think are frankly more important, as equally important, if not more, than enforcement, and that is prevention and intervention. And so when I started looking at these videos, we have a great artist at the state attorney's office who I shared these videos with him, and I asked him, I said, put together a compilation of these various, we call them rap videos. And he said, what are you going to do with this? I said, I don't know yet. And I didn't bring it to you today. It's very dramatic and very disturbing. We're going to show you just a couple of clips. But at the end of it, I met with the gang detectives, the experts at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. And I said, tell me about each of these kids. I think there were 14 in all depicted in various videos. And all 14 of them were either, by the time we had put this together, in prison or dead. In these videos, to the point about prevention and intervention, there were little children, often caught on camera. And these are younger brothers, nephews, kids in the neighborhood. And I continue to think, what do we expect for these children? Because they're not growing up like my children. And there is a demographic that we're going to talk about. When they're seeing, when they know people going to prison, when they know victims of, not one victim of murder, but multiple people who becomes the victim of homicide, they become, when they hear gunfire, when they go to bed at night, they become desensitized, apathetic. Violence becomes normalized in their lives. And so I want to preface this talk by saying, I really do think, especially Rotary, who is an organization so focused on the betterment of community, that is where I think this city needs to redouble our efforts, because we certainly have redoubled our enforcement efforts. And we're going to talk about some of the things that I take great pride in what we've done at the state attorney's office. But enforcement is at the end of the line. And sadly, it's often at the cost of lives. And so obviously we would all be better off and be celebrating success if we were talking about these shootings going down. For reasons, go ahead and David, if you'll go to the next slide. I'm going to share with you some of these statistics. These are statistics about the gun violence in Jacksonville. The year-to-date 2020 shows you the specific numbers at this point in time last year as compared to this year. The bottom number is the most significant. If you'll go to the next slide, we had 490 shootings, non-domestic shootings. So we carve out in statistical analysis those homicides that occur because of intimate partner violence. 490 bullet to bone, bullet to flesh shootings. And we are on pace this year to be 10% higher than we were last year. For reasons that criminologists will study for years to come, we don't know, but last year with COVID, what we saw in Jacksonville was not unique to this jurisdiction. It happened across the United States. David, if you'll go to the next slide, please. This just came out of a report just released maybe a month ago. This is Jacksonville, showing that last year there was a 6% increase across the board with violent crime. I would not want to be the DA outside of Oakland, who saw 150% increase in violence, but you can see all of the major cities across the United States saw, after what we know has been decades of decline in violence, a surge last year that people will be studying for a long time as to why. And we haven't seen it stem yet. And so this is not unique to Jacksonville. It's I'm on calls frequently with counterparts and colleagues across the United States, and people don't know. Everybody can theorize right now what's giving rise to this, but it's market, as you can see. David, the next slide, please. Okay, you'll pause that, David. That is real audio, ShotSpotter audio from Jacksonville in 2017. No one was shot. You should know that often in these rival gang fights, nobody is hit. They are not good marksmen, which you can only imagine what our crime rate would be if they actually good marksmen. But I'm going to talk a little bit about ShotSpotter. This is between July of 2017 and July of 2018. ShotSpotter, which is audio technology employed by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, strategically placed in the city of Jacksonville, was activated by gunfire over 1,000 times. So that's more than 87 times a month. But less than 20% of those shots fired translated to calls for service to 911. If you heard something like that on your street, how many of you would pick up the phone and call 911? Of course. I mean, that sounds like war. And let me tell you, I use this as an example, but this is not unique. The Targeted Prosecution Division, which I'll talk a little bit about, we all have ShotSpotter audio on our phone. It's an app on our phone that activates in real time as it is being activated. And I had to turn the notifications off because it is shocking to hear how frequently this audio captures gunfire. Tragically as well, the idea that kids are hearing this and nobody's calling, why? We can speculate about why. But the reason we have this audio technology is that so police who otherwise might not know about a shooting because nobody called it in, now they do by virtue of this technology. And two things happen. Once they hear about shots fired, they deploy patrol. And we're going to talk a little bit about NIBIN at the end of my talk and the way we're using NIBIN technology. But something they're doing today, which we have not historically done, is they're picking up all of the brass on the ground. In that case, nobody's shot, nobody's hit. So by the time the police get there, nobody's going to be around. But there's going to be a lot of cartridge casings on the ground. And so picking them up, and then I'll talk a little later about what they're doing with them. But that example of that audio is occurring in our city. David, if you'll, I'm going to show you also a ring video that captured a shooting recently in a residential neighborhood. This ring video, if you'll go back, just pause it, please. Yeah, don't play it again, if you don't mind. This ring video is captured right after a car drives by and from the car lets out a small child. Ooh. So this is happening routinely, but our city really galvanizes when kids get caught in crossfire. That's when everybody's antenna go up. That's when all the conversations start happening. But you know, at any time, and there's multitude of videos like this. If an innocent gets caught in crossfire, it's obviously tragic. So if you'll go to the next slide, David, please. These are some clips from some of the videos I've talked about. This is difficult to see here. He's double fisted with guns right here. Obviously, you see this gun, these guns. I was invited this past year to give testimony to the Presidential Commission on Law Enforcement because the efforts of our office were recognized as as being a little outside of the box and not just historically the traditional mechanism by employing the tools that I'm going to talk about to attack violence. And so I think David put a clip in of my testimony.
We've tried to think outside of the box. We've initiated novel prosecutions against prohibited carriers and shooters who brazenly show off their semi-automatic and automatic rifles, extended, and drum magazines on their social media platforms. We have used their own videos, words, and photos against them, even in cases where we don't have the firearm itself.
Okay, that's important. My colleague and our friend and public defender, elected public defender, Charlie Cofer is here. When I saw these videos, many of these people are prohibited. So I want to be very clear, we're not going after lawful gun owners and people who are legally carrying. I know Alan Roser collects and has quite a collection of firearms. We are targeting people who are prohibited by law. And all of these young men are felons. They're not allowed to have guns. So they would create these videos and they do a disclaimer on the beginning of the video saying, and many of these are professionally produced, that these are all props. Why? Because as prosecutors, when we go into a court of law and we charge somebody with possessing a firearm that they are prohibited from possessing, we have to prove it was a firearm. So they put on their videos that these are all props, and they actually, I will say, for a long time, enjoyed some cloak of protection because there was this idea, well, without the gun, we can't make the case. So the theory behind the division that Aaron mentioned, the targeted prosecution division, is this. Historically, in the state attorney's office, we had divisions and we had courts actually dedicated to the prosecution of people who are deemed under the law to be habitual offenders. And I worked in some of those courts. And so I sent people, prosecuted people who went to prison for decades for selling drugs because they had prior sales. But there was very little thought about whether that drug seller was actually, look, by nature of the drug trade, there's lots of danger associated with it. So please don't mistake what I'm saying as saying they're not public safety threats. But there was little thought about whether that person selling a crack rock was really a public safety threat. Was that person also pulling gun triggers? So the concept of targeted prosecution is that we dedicate our resources on the people we know are driving violent crime. Because this violence that I'm showing you, it's being driven by, we know, a very small percentage of people. And so we should focus, in my mind, on those people. And if we can't get them on multiple shootings or multiple murders because people won't participate with prosecution, when we can prosecute them and incapacitate them for a different felony, that's the goal of this unit. So the targeted prosecution unit, we started looking at this and we retained an expert to say, okay, is there a way to bring these cases to court? Is there a way to analyze these firearms and you and your expert opinion to tell us whether or not they are real? And so it's been super interesting. We hired a renowned expert who has spent his entire life in the field of firearms analysis. And there are some guns who he tells us, I'm sorry, I can't tell you if this is real or not, because there's mocks on the market. And there are other guns that we're able to enhance the video. And because of different markings on the weaponry and unique identifiers, he's able to give us, this is in fact a real firearm. And so when I talk about novel prosecutions, that's what we have done. Now we have been criticized, in the newspaper for doing this. These cases, small amount of them are in the pipeline. As you can imagine, they take a lot of resources to put together. And we're focusing on the people who we believe, in conjunction with law enforcement, to be the most dangerous. You'll go to the next one, David, please. So the gang demographics. They're typically young minority men, ages 16 to 24. We have seen young men recruited as early as 12 years old. That's hard for me to believe. I have a 12-year-old in my house. They are, not surprisingly, surrounded by violence, often exposed to poverty, trauma, drugs, and guns. This is from gang members themselves, because we have spent effort in developing relationships with some who are willing to communicate with us so that we can understand the culture better. School is seen as a weakness. Many of these kids are dropping out before they even get to high school. Cooperating with the law is punished. The gang experts in Jacksonville have told us that our group violence is arguably even more dangerous than that in other cities, because we have knockoffs, if you will, of the Crips and the Bloods, but the Crips and the Bloods are organized. And like Rotary, while they may be involved in an illegal enterprise, there's a hierarchy, and there's leadership, and there's a credo, and there's rules. No kids, no police. When you lose that hierarchy in that organization, and they're loosely organized, they arguably are more dangerous, because there is no internal, when you break, there is no code of ethics. I see you nodding. I know you know this to be true. So what we're seeing in Jacksonville is different what LA knows or sees, but it's still reckless. Often initiation into gangs is to go out and shoot somebody, to kill somebody, and extracting oneself from a gang can almost certainly mean your own death. So once in, it's very difficult to get out. Go ahead, David. We're missing a picture. I took this picture. This is when I talk about kids getting caught in the crossfire. Before I gave my testimony last year, just a week before in April, we had a 5-year-old caught in gunfire, 2 prohibited people in a shootout, not gang related, but in a shootout in a convenience store parking lot as her grandfather drove up to grab some Gatorade. Tragic. So these are the faces of kids caught in crossfire. David, if you'll go to the next one. So I've talked a little bit about what we're doing. The Targeted Prosecution Division, which is focused not necessarily on records, but on identifying the drivers of violent crime. We've embedded those prosecutors in the Crime Gun and Intelligence Center, which is actually housed in the state attorney's office. So this is a hub where local, state, and federal law enforcement partners are working with our prosecutors from the get-go to make sure that we're giving them legal advice, to make sure their warrants and search warrants are sound and based on sound probable cause. And as technology is changing, it's really important that we are staying abreast of that technology and making sure that the law that's created as we are doing new and novel things is based on good practice. And so this unit, this center, is now in the state attorney's office. Next slide, David. And one of the things we're doing there is discussing NIVEN leads. So we meet every single week at 8:30 on Tuesday. And I thought this picture would be interesting to you all. I talked about the collection of cartridge casing. So Alan, I know you know this. Tell the group about what happens to a cartridge casing when it goes through the barrel of a gun.
It's, I think what they're called striations on the cartridge case. The primer, which is what detonates, again, is caused by the firing pin. They can be microscopically examined because supposedly, at least this is the state's argument, that there are unique features, each firearm that causes unique striations or unique primer dents, and therefore the cartridge can be identified.
Excellent job. Very nice job, Mr. Rosner. So it's true, a cartridge casing, after being fired from a gun, becomes imprinted essentially like a fingerprint with unique identifiers that can match that cartridge casing both to other cartridge casings also fired from that same weapon and to the weapon itself. So why is that important? We've had this technology for decades. When I was at the state attorney's office, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement We would send a gun if we were so lucky to have it, and cartridge casings, and we would wait maybe 18 months and we would be told ultimately a match or not. So we were using it historically as probative evidence we were not using it as a lead generator. And when, Aaron mentioned before I started that this has been declared by law enforcement a game changer, we were very fortunate in Jacksonville because when I came into office, I was having regular meet and greets with a variety of people, and I happened to be sitting down with somebody from ATF, and this had become a priority of ATF. And he said, do you know what NIBIN is? Yes, I understand what NIBIN is. I've used it before. Well, have you ever thought about using it in a different way? How do you mean? And so he told me about, well, what if you could, rather than wait 18 months for a result, what if you could have that result in 72 hours? What if you could link shooting to shooting? Would you want that information? Yeah, of course. So we went to the city, and the city saw value in this and then funded this. So right now, when I talked about patrol going out and picking up the brass, even if nobody's there, cartridge casings, and they put them through this software. This is a water tank I'll talk about in just a moment, but they put it through this software. We've been building essentially a database, and these are now pieces of intelligence. They might not ultimately become a piece of probative evidence we use in trial, but they're a piece of evidence that's telling us something. So if we pick up cartridge casings from a shooting, on 8th Street, and all of a sudden we run those and we get a hit, a match to a shooting that occurred 4 days earlier, that occurred 2 weeks earlier, that occurred 6 months earlier, we might not know at that point who's pulling the trigger, because obviously we also know that crime guns change hands, but we know that single gun has been used in each of those incidents. That's important to us. We now know they're related in some way. So information we might have at one scene could be probative to another scene. So we have been overwhelmed with information. JSO has now 2 analysts that all day long, they read NIBIN leads to triage them, to decide what is of value for detectives to now work. The shoot tank is when, in the event that we actually obtain a firearm. Let's say a car is stopped and guns are found in the car. They take those guns, then they'll use the shoot tank. They'll run that gun and they'll see, oh my gosh, this gun was used at this scene, and this scene. It's another piece of intelligence. So we're using this technology that we've had for a long time in a very different way. Sadly, I'm not standing behind this podium yet to tell you a success story. But as somebody told me recently when I was lamenting frustration in not seeing what I call wins on the board yet, he said, can you imagine how bad it would be if we weren't doing all of these things? We have made some arrests that otherwise never would have been made, solved crimes we never other would have solved. And actually, in my mind, it's hard to measure, but certainly by virtue of those things, prevented other crimes because of this technology. Next slide, please. So we try to think differently about our approach to crime gun prosecution. I'll close up with this. I spent a year looking at hard files. I brought them to my office and looked at all of what we call PFCO, so possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. I wanted to look at every file every case we had dropped over the course of a year. And I wanted to look at why we had dropped them. If I was going to see, whenever we drop a case, when we don't prosecute a case, we memorialize our reasons why we don't. And I wanted to find out, like, was there something we were missing? Is there something more we could be doing? Is there a trend? Were we not prosecuting cases because of Fourth Amendment violations? What was going on? That led to an additional audit of how we were handling unlicensed carry concealed, which is historically in our circuit thought of as a low-level crime and cycled through. And in looking at some of the dockets, I saw what I would call red flags. I'm going to use 2 examples. So one case, we had a male nurse who was working a late night shift. He was arrested for unlicensed carry because he had a weapon that he had a not contained properly pursuant to the law and didn't have a carry concealed permit. And he was arrested. And so that's one set of facts. I saw another set of facts where 2 o'clock in the morning, a hot, humid June morning, hotspotter call, police go out, young male in a hood, in the hood is a mask, extended magazine, gun. The mask and the hood indicate to me in the extended magazine, in the conjunction with the shot spotter call, are red flags. Also had a gang affiliation. And so those are two, same crime, both of them arrested for unlicensed carry conceal, but very different set of circumstances. So I thought, well, you can't do something, you know, one size can't fit all for everything. Okay, thanks, I'm wrapping up. One size can't fit everything, but we really should be very thoughtful about who we and how we are treating people based on different circumstances. The one with that had all of the issues is now a suspect in a homicide, as you would imagine, maybe not surprised. The nurse went through court regularly. And so we set up a diversion program for the cases that look like the nurses, right? People of the law in Florida. And we have, since standing it up, have sent several people there. But for the people, we created a checklist with risk factors. And for those people who have risk factors, we mandated a term, a sentence essentially, a minimum term of incarceration. This is a hard time in the COVID pandemic to be doing that, right? We're also at the same time charging our prosecutors with trying to get people with low-level offenses out of the county jail because it's an incubator for this virus. But because of the surge in violence, there was no time to wait. So we are focused on gun crime in particular. And whether or not it makes a difference, we have yet to see. We also, as I mentioned, the prevention and intervention, while outside of our lane, we've really used both our voice to the extent that it matters to support those efforts. We've tried to put our prosecutors on boards throughout the city that are engaged in this work because we do think we have a perspective to share. We developed a 3-year strategic plan that speaks to all of these things, prevention and intervention being in the bucket of smart justice, and obviously the violent crime initiatives in the public safety bucket. And we've stood up most recently a community crime strategies unit that I have a lot of hope for, again, in an environment and at a time that is difficult for it to get off the ground. But the concept, essentially, we've hired some great people for this unit, is to, I just touched on a little bit about the lack of cooperation in prosecutions that stems from a lack of trust in the criminal justice system. And I believe if we can introduce ourselves, and I mean the institution, the office itself, to people in the communities most plagued by virus before we issue a subpoena and yank them in and tell them we need them to tell us what they saw. If we have some relationship with those communities before we need their help, that it will only enhance our ability to do our work. And so that is our most recent initiative that I'm looking very forward to once we normalize seeing what they do. But I'll close with this. You know, we started a conversation at the table. You told me some of your ideas. I really welcome ideas, and I think any suggestions you have, there's no stupid idea. Any thought you have, any question you have, we're an open door, and I'd encourage you to reach out. We study a lot what's going on in jurisdictions, what's works, what's failed. As I've said, we find ourselves in a weird time, but this is a priority that we're committed to, and hopefully, long after I'm gone, there'll, you know, the efforts that we're putting in now will hopefully reap some success at some. And I know, as much as I want short-term success, we got here. I often say we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. This is the things we're employing are with a long view in mind. So thank you so much for having me. Hope you found some of this interesting and educational. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you for suggestions. What can we do as individuals and as a club to get involved? I've always felt like hands-on activities are helpful, but this is, daunting and this year. What can we do?
So this is what I would say. This city is made up of so many well-intentioned people and so many well-intentioned organizations that aren't communicating, are duplicative in efforts often. And what I have found is that these often nonprofits, it takes a willing parent, right? A struggling mom who says, I want better for my kid, to go contact that nonprofit to put her kid in PATH or in Big Brothers or Big Sisters. But there's a whole population of kids who don't have a parent who's knocking on anybody's door. I don't know how to fix that. I might encourage your organization to give some thought to that. I know you're talking about setting up a Rotary on the northwest side of Jacksonville, but I think it's that group of young people that we have to touch. I've had meetings with the school district, and naturally for privacy laws, we can't, teachers know what's going on and can see it early on, but they can't share that information with law enforcement or a prosecutor. But maybe there'd be a way for nonprofits to plug in and fill that gap. And it's not so much the kids who have a parent or a grandparent who do seek out resources, because there are many. It's the kids who are on the streets and they don't have a parent or a grandparent connecting them with anything. And again, I don't want to go off on, but I also feel very strongly about sports, athletics, team coaching. Like, I feel like that's such a key for so many kids. But
in the time I shot a 45 at officer candidate school in the Navy, I thought these weapons should not be sold on the open market, because you can stick them in your pocket and you can kill people readily. It's a very dangerous weapon.
These young kids have AR-15s. We're well beyond 45.
Why we don't consider gun control?
Well, I will say this: guns are ubiquitous in our city. They are, and one of the things I gave thought to is, from where are the guns coming? Is there a way that we can, and I have not seen yet, I could be proven wrong, a gun trafficking problem, but we don't need to have a trafficking problem when they are so easy to get hands on.
Do you have any questions on Zoom, real quickly? Are there any questions on Zoom?
Yes, this is Bill Traer. I'd like to ask a question. I believe, Melissa, I'm on the board of Elevate, and I think you're familiar with our program.
I love Elevate.
And Sheriff Williams, I know I've talked to him on this subject, and the Elevate's very successful, but we're dealing with bubble kids. They're on the bubble between where they could wind up in your system or where they could go out and become constructive citizens. So I would love to find a way we could, maybe work in some way to bring some of the kids that are getting into your system into our Elevate program somehow, because they're just not there now.
So I would love to talk to you further about that, because I think the work you're doing is incredible, and the results are proven, and to scale that and replicate it, I think would be great. I know that Jay Plotkin is also on this call. Something else, if maybe this organization would want to do further work. And when Jay was the chief assistant, they had a program that existed in our county jail, and it had great success. It's been completely, doesn't exist anymore. And I would love to see it happen again, to occur again. And they were pretty creative in how once kids were in the system and we had the leverage and the hammer in the form of prosecution in the courts to extract what we needed from them, which was for them to be educated, for them to learn a skill, for them to learn some measure of discipline. So I'd really like to see that, but that involves funding issues and complicated issues, but that is also something I'd like to see. But I'd love to talk to you, Bill, offline about Elevate.
Yes, have you all came across any organization yet that addresses the youth and the parents?
So I don't know if you've read about Cure Violence, but Cure Violence is now, we have 2 sites in Jacksonville. And the idea, the concept, the model, when it is functioning at an A+ level, which it is currently not yet, is that when they have a referral, so that is a person who is in the streets, is in crisis, is either threatened by retaliatory violence or threatening retaliatory violence, that if that referral has young children in the home, that those young children will also, and parents, be referred to nonprofit supporting agencies. That piece does not appear to be happening, but that is the goal of that intervention effort. This intervention effort is in the street to get word that violence is brewing, conflict is brewing, and actually working, instead of law enforcement in uniform with a badge, people who have credibility because they've lived this life, to try to intervene and cool down the conflict. It's had very significant success in other jurisdictions, and it's here, and it's had some early minimal, but definitely success. But the piece of that that's so important is not working as it should yet.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Cure Violence. Me and Pastor Girl are really good friends, and he's actually part of what me and Bob Matt and a few others are trying to do with the Rotary Northwest Jax. So.
That's great.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
But also as a thank you, we'll be making contributions
Thank
to the
you.
Rotary International Polio Plus Foundation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very well done. Thanks, Melissa. All right. Maybe if people have questions, a few more while you're still hanging around.
Sure.
Thanks for that. All right. So, so here comes the reminder to RSVP. Look, we had all of you here, and we can plan for you because you let us know. So I'll continue to encourage you to RSVP, DAC-TV. You're doing a good job. Thank you for that. Next week, our speaker will be Melissa Ross with WJCT. So as we end our meeting, please join me in the Rotary motto. Service above self, one profit supposed to serve the best. Next week.